Eddard Stark stood on the battlements of Winterfell, the chill wind biting at his cheeks. He had been standing there for hours, as if searching the northern skies for a sign that might shift the course of his life. Darkness was pressing down, and the moon shimmered above like a distant, milk-white eye. Yet beneath that stark and silent night, something deeper than shadows stirred within Ned's mind. He had received a message the previous evening, carried by a raven whose flight was eerily silent. The missive was written in an archaic form of High Valyrian that Maester Luwin had labored over for hours, decoding cryptic phrases that had turned the old maester's face ashen. When Luwin finally translated what he could, his voice had wavered. The message spoke of the old blood of Valyria, of loyalty that had never fully died, and of weapons from a lost age, artifacts that could shatter steel and carve through flesh as easily as a keen blade cuts silk. At first, Ned dismissed it as the ravings of a fevered mind. Winterfell was far from such conspiracies. Such talk belonged in the south, where the Targaryen name still kindled fear or loyalty, depending on whose ear you bent. But the letter was real enough, and it invoked his father's memory. It mentioned Rickard Stark's unwavering honor. It spoke of the rebellion years, of how House Stark had once been courted by Targaryen suitors seeking an alliance. But above all else, it offered a promise. An accord unlike any Ned had ever considered, one that could reshape the entire realm. The notion sat ill with him. Eddard Stark was not a man for great and terrible secrets. He preferred honesty and straightforward duties. A sword, a vow, a shield for his loved ones. The idea of dabbling in old, forbidden arts or forging pacts with people who worshipped the fire-scarred legends of Valyria clashed with everything he was. The realm was at peace, or at least as close to peace as it ever came. Robert Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne, and though the king grew heavier and more complacent by the day, Ned considered it a far more stable arrangement than resurrecting ghosts from Valyria's smoking seas. Yet the letter persisted in his mind. It carried hints of urgent warnings. A threat was stirring, one that could encompass not merely the north, but all of Westeros. It promised dire consequences if the old bond was not renewed. Ned's first instinct was to burn the parchment. He had put it aside, determined to ignore it. But the words planted a seed of doubt in his heart. Late that night, he found himself standing in the crypts beneath Winterfell, where the statues of ancient Stark kings and lords loomed in the torchlight. Their solemn stony faces seemed to regard him with a watchful gaze. He walked past his father's resting place, then his sister's, Lyanna. At her tomb he paused, remembering the promise he had made and the secrets he kept. That same hush of memory and regret weighed upon him as he recalled the Targaryen child who lived now in a hidden place, his kin by a truth he dared not speak aloud. Could this letter be connected to that old legacy? The swirling gloom in the crypt only deepened the sense of dread in Ned's gut. But something else was there too. An undeniable curiosity, a faint spark of possibility. As dawn's first light crept over the horizon, he left the crypts with a decision forming. He would respond to the letter, not with a vow or agreement, but with caution. He would meet the messenger, see what these so-called old Valyrian loyalists wanted. He owed it to his father's memory to at least hear them out. If there was danger to the Stark name or the realm, better to face it head-on than let it fester in the darkness. That evening, while the rest of the castle feasted in the great hall, Ned stole away to Maester Luwin's turret and asked him to pen a carefully worded reply. It offered neither acceptance nor denial, merely a willingness to speak in person, in some safe corner of the north. As he pressed his sigil upon the wax seal, Ned felt a tug of unease, as if he had just opened a door that should have remained barred. Yet he let the raven carry the letter off, vanishing into the cold twilight. Afterward, Ned retreated once more to the battlements, gazing over Winterfell's courtyard, the stables, the forging yard where men tested the edges of their blades. A hush fell over the fortress. In the short distance, he could see the faint flicker of the first keep's torches. The night deepened, and he stood vigil, wondering if he was making a grievous mistake. Winter in the north was no gentle season. It demanded resilience, demanded that a man choose his battles carefully. The old adage from his childhood swirled in his thoughts. Winter is coming. It rang like a warning bell through his soul. Now it seemed that winter arrived not just as a cold season, but as a wave of ancient legacies seeking him out. Ned allowed himself one final moment of quiet doubt before turning away from the crenellations. His heart was set on learning the truth, but he would do so on his terms, with caution, with honor, and with the unwavering vigilance that made him Eddard Stark. A week passed before another raven arrived. This time, the message was short and to the point, instructing Ned to come to a place deep in the Wolfswood, accompanied by 2 men he trusted, and no more. The messenger would be there. The letter bore no signature, only an odd mark, a stylized dragon's head entwined with the dire wolf of House Stark. Ned stared at it for a moment. The mixture of the dragon and the wolf was something out of old stories, where Targaryens and Starks might share a common cause. Shaking his head, he prepared for the journey. He selected Jory Castle and Tomard, men he trusted with his life, and departed under the guise of a hunting excursion. The day was gray and cold as they rode from Winterfell, each man bearing a sword at his side. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the path into the Wolfswood took them under arching boughs that whispered with the hush of an ageless forest. Ned rode in silence, alert for any sign of an ambush. He had no illusions. This could be a trap, though for what reason he could not yet guess. They arrived at a small clearing, the forest canopy creating a dimness that felt almost like twilight. A gentle stream bubbled at its far edge, and the hush of the wind through the trees gave the place an eerie calm. They waited. Twice Ned considered turning back, but he kept his vigil, scanning the tree-line for movement. When at last a figure emerged, cloaked in black with a hood that concealed their face, Ned's hand drifted to the hilt of his sword. Jory and Tomard tensed beside him. The hooded figure raised a hand slowly, a gesture of peace. Then, in a voice soft yet resonant, a woman's voice, if Ned was not mistaken, the stranger greeted him in formal High Valyrian. He responded simply, "I am Eddard Stark, Warden of the North. Speak plainly." When the woman lowered her hood, Ned saw a face that was neither young nor old, with silver-blonde hair threaded with streaks of gray. Her eyes bore an intensity that made him think of Targaryen descent, yet there was no madness in them. Instead, they held purpose and desperation. "Lord Stark," she said in the common tongue, her accent a curious blend of the free cities and something older still. "We have little time. You have heard the rumors, no doubt, that the Iron Throne sits uneasy, that the 7 kingdoms are fractured beneath King Robert's rule." Ned gave a curt nod. Rumors always swirl. Yet if your purpose is to seat a Targaryen on the throne once more, you waste your breath. "Robert is my friend, and I have sworn him my loyalty." She stiffened. "We do not speak for any living Targaryen claimant, my lord. Our loyalty is to Valyria itself, to the memory of what was lost. But the time for secrets and half-measures is at an end. Shadows creep across the land from beyond the seas. The dragonglass oracles speak of an evil stirring, an ancient threat that might make the petty squabbles of lords and kings irrelevant." Ned was not one for omens or oracles. He remained wary, though curiosity tugged at him again. What threat? The woman looked around as if expecting listeners in the woods. An unleashed power that once slumbered across the sea in the ruins of Valyria, a force older than the Doom itself. Some among us believe that the only hope lies in forging alliances with the Starks, for the blood of the first men runs strong in you. Combined with the old ways of Valyria, we might stand a chance to contain this darkness. But we cannot do it alone. Weapons remain hidden in the heart of the smoking sea, powerful relics. They are the only means to quell what stirs. Relics? Ned grimaced. He remembered the tales of Valyrian steel swords of legend. But these old loyalists seemed to speak of something more potent, perhaps more dangerous. "Why come to me?" he demanded. "I am no dragon. I have no interest in illusions of grandeur." She regarded him solemnly. The old alliance between House Stark and House Targaryen was once proposed, never realized. Yet a bond remains in the shadows. The truth of it is known to you, I think. Her gaze flicked to Ned's face, as if searching for a reaction to the secret of Jon's parentage he carried like a weight on his heart. "We believe you might be the key to ensuring these ancient weapons do not fall into the wrong hands. The blood of the wolf stands guard." Ned felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. "I keep my oaths," he said. "If you desire to bring ruin upon the realm, know that I will oppose you. If you speak the truth, prove it." She inclined her head. "Come with me, my lord, or send a trusted envoy if you fear treachery. We will lead you to a place in the east where remnants of Valyria's power still linger. You must see for yourself." Ned's jaw tightened. The thought of leaving the north on such a wild quest was unthinkable. And yet, the letter, the crypts, the quiet, insistent murmur in his heart. Something told him this was no ordinary ruse. He glanced at Jory and Tomard, whose expressions were carefully neutral, though he saw worry in their eyes. What would Caitlin say to this madness? Or worse, what would Robert do? He exhaled, each breath crystallizing in the chill forest air. "I will not commit my men to some foreign venture without proof. Provide me a token of your sincerity, something tangible." The woman considered for a moment, then reached within her cloak, producing a small dagger. Its blade gleamed like dark ice, carved of dragonglass. But the hilt was something else entirely. A chunk of refined metal that glimmered with a faint pattern of rippling lines. Valyrian steel, Ned realized, but shaped in a way he had never seen. He took it gingerly, half expecting it to burn his palm. "There are more," she said. "Tools of war beyond imagination. You will receive word soon. When the time comes, decide whether you will join us, or let the realm face a danger older than the Seven themselves." She turned away then, leaving him with the dagger and a swirl of unsettling thoughts. Jory gave chase, but she vanished into the trees, more phantom than flesh. Left behind was an eerie quiet that settled on them like a shroud. For a long moment, Ned stared at the black glass blade and the cunning patterns in the steel hilt. He had seen Valyrian weapons before. Ice, his own ancestral greatsword, was a prime example. But this dagger felt different, almost alive with some buried resonance. He remembered the talk of ancient curses and whispered lore that came from the free cities, from travelers who spoke of the horrors still lingering in the smoking sea. Could it be that something was truly awakening? "Lord Stark," Jory said gently. "What now?" Ned tucked the dagger into his belt, his voice quieter than he intended. "We return to Winterfell, and we wait for the next move." He felt the weight of the dagger tug at him as they rode away, as though it anchored him to a new and dangerous path. In the weeks that followed, word spread that King Robert planned a grand tourney at Harrenhal to celebrate the 10th year of his reign. Royal envoys scurried across the 7 kingdoms, collecting tributes and pledges of attendance from great lords and small. Ned received his summons, sealed with the royal crest. He dreaded going south. The memory of his last journey to King's Landing still stung him, and he had no taste for courtly intrigue. Yet to refuse an invitation from the king would raise eyebrows. Winterfell's loyalty could not be called into question, not after the bond Robert and Ned once shared. Still, the realm stirred with unrest. Whispers of tension between the Lannisters and the Baratheons abounded. Rumors of rebellious talk among certain bannermen. Through it all, Ned felt the subtle pull of that clandestine meeting in the Wolfswood, the knowledge that he held a piece of Valyria's lost might at his hip. The dagger was carefully wrapped and kept in a locked chest. He tried not to think of it, but sometimes he caught himself staring at the chest in the gloom of his solar, wondering if he should cast it into the forge and melt it down. Yet he never did. Eventually, the day arrived for his departure south. Winterfell's courtyard buzzed with activity as horses were loaded, wagons packed, and a retinue of guards assembled. Caitlin kissed Ned's cheek as they said their farewells, her eyes concerned. "You seem burdened, my lord," she said softly. He kissed her forehead. "There is always a burden when traveling south," he murmured, giving her a reassurance he did not quite feel. He embraced each of his children in turn, instructing Robb to mind Maester Lewin's counsel and keep the peace in his father's absence. Arya pouted at not being able to come, while Sansa's eyes shone with curiosity for the wonders of a royal tourney. Ned only prayed she would never see the ugliness behind all that gilded pageantry. They set off, the northern roads stretching before them like a winding gray serpent. Beside Ned rode a small retinue, Jory, Tomard, a handful of trusted knights, and a few servants. They traveled steadily, watching the green of the south gradually replace the stark landscapes of the north. Woods grew thicker, towns more frequent. At each stop, Ned kept his eyes open for any sign of the woman who had visited him, or for any new messages that might be waiting. But none came. When at last Harrenhal's looming towers rose against the sky, black stone against a bleak horizon, Ned was reminded of the last great tourney held there. A time when Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark stood at the heart of a swirling fate. A wave of nostalgia and sorrow overcame him. So much had changed, yet Harrenhal still stood, a monument to ambition and ruin. The king's pavilion sprawled outside the castle walls, bright with banners snapping in the wind. Great lords from every corner of the realm had gathered, feasting and plotting in equal measure. Robert's laughter boomed across the camp as he greeted Ned, gripping him in a bear-like hug. The king's girth had grown, and his once fierce eyes had grown watery from too many cups of wine, but the old warmth was still there. For the moment, Ned let his worries recede, savoring a brief reunion with the friend he had nearly died for in the rebellion. But that night, as he lay in a guest chamber within Harrenhal's half-ruined walls, Ned dreamt of dragons. He saw ghostly shapes of fire gliding above the towers, heard shrieks that rattled the heavens, and he glimpsed a single, unwavering wolf shape among them, howling its defiance. When he woke, sweat drenching his brow, he did not know whether the dream was warning or prophecy, only that the quiet dread within him had returned in force. The tourney went on for days. Knights jousted before cheering crowds, merchants hawked their wares, and bards sang ballads of old heroes. Ned moved through it all with a sense of distant observation, attending feasts and offering polite nods to courtiers who tried to pry into his good graces. Every now and then, he glimpsed men in cloaks that reminded him of the woman in the wolfswood, strangers whose eyes lingered too long. But he found no concrete evidence, no secret sign that would confirm they were the same. On the third day, a messenger approached with a small scroll. He was a gaunt man with deep-set eyes who pressed the parchment into Ned's hand, then faded into the crowd. Ned quickly pocketed the message and retreated to a secluded corner of the courtyard to read it. The words were spare, written in the same archaic Valyrian script Maester Luwin had once deciphered. The hour draws near. Look beneath the burned tower at midnight. That was all. A prickle of unease and reluctant anticipation raced through Ned. The burned tower within Harrenhal was well known, one of many scorched by the fire of Aegon's dragons. Why there? He recalled the half-collapsed stone, the rubble-filled corridors. Could a secret meeting be arranged in such a place? Night fell, and the castle's corridors hushed as most revelers turned to the main halls for feasting. Under the cover of darkness, Ned left his sleeping quarters and made his way to the burned tower, cloak pulled close, sword strapped to his side. He moved quietly, careful not to arouse suspicion. Once he reached the old tower, its silhouette black against a cloudy sky, he picked his way through broken stones and charred timbers. The faint flicker of a lantern drew him into a crumbling chamber that smelled of ash and old dust. There, surrounded by the vestiges of Harrenhal's ancient ruin, stood a small group of figures. Their cloaks bore embroidered designs of dragons in flight, though each design was subtly different. One might be twisted with flames, another with swirling smoke. At the center stood the woman from the wolfswood, her silver-blonde hair glinting in the lantern light. "Lord Stark," she said, voice low, "you have come." Ned's eyes flicked over the group. 6 of them, all armed, though none had weapons drawn. "You left me little choice. Now tell me what this is about." She stepped forward. "We depart soon. In less than a fortnight, a ship will sail from King's Landing to the Smoking Sea, carrying those of us sworn to this cause. I ask you to join us, or send someone you trust in your stead." The time for doubt is past. Forces move across the sea that will not wait for us to resolve our own petty squabbles. Anger flared in Ned's chest. And you presume I can simply abandon my duties? That I will slip away to chase old myths? King Robert would sooner declare me a traitor if he learned I was consorting with the likes of you. She held his gaze, her eyes fierce. If we fail, my lord, there may not be a realm left to be loyal to. The darkness that stirs cares nothing for kings or laws. It has slept since the doom of Valyria, sealed away by the last dragon lords who dared stand against it. But those bindings weaken. If it breaks free, let it come, Ned said coldly, though the words tasted hollow in his mouth. We have faced threats before. The wall stands. The knights watch guards. Her lips parted in something close to pity. This is no white or wildling threat, my lord. This is an evil that was once contained through powers older than the wall. Yet the knowledge to fight it has been lost, scattered. We are gathering what remains. The last shards of Valyrian might and the ancient oath of the first men. We cannot do it without the North. Another of the cloaked figures stepped forward. A tall, lean man with dark hair that had a faint silver sheen in the lantern light. We ask for an emissary. You have a son, do you? You not? A ward. He hesitated, as if uncertain how best to phrase the next words. Someone whose blood might carry both the wolf and the dragon? Ned's hand clenched around the hilt of his sword. My children are none of your concern. We mean no harm to them, the man insisted. But the prophecy. Silence, the woman snapped, silencing her companion. Lord Stark alone will decide who, if anyone, comes with us. We will sail from King's Landing on the first day of the new moon. That is all. Ned stood there, breathing hard, torn by conflicting loyalties. He despised the secrecy, the half-revealed truths. Yet a part of him recognized the urgency in their voices. The dagger at Winterfell, the dream of dragons, the sense that something shadowy and immense lurked on the edges of the world. Could he truly ignore it all? I will think on it, he said at last, voice gruff. But no promises. They nodded as one, as though that were enough. Before they slipped away into the darkness, the woman turned back. Your friend the king will heed no warnings of this. His is a rule built on victory in a war that banished Targaryen power. He will laugh at our claims, or worse, seek to destroy us if he thinks we threaten his throne. Ned sighed. Then it seems we are alone in this. The woman's eyes flickered. Not alone, my lord. We are together for good or ill. I pray you remember that, before the end. With that, they melted into the night, leaving Ned alone in the burned tower. For a long moment, he stared at the place where they'd stood, half expecting them to reappear. But the only sound was the wind sighing through broken walls. By the time Ned returned to his chamber, exhaustion weighed on him. Sleep did not come easily. His mind churned with doubts and possibilities. If this was true, if some dire force threatened the realm, how could he simply ignore it? And yet, how could he raise the alarm without proof? Robert would laugh, dismiss these claims as Targaryen fanaticism. Others might see it as treason. His thoughts turned to Jon Snow, the boy he had raised as his bastard. Could he truly place the burden of such a journey upon Jon's shoulders? The quiet, watchful lad was now at the wall, training with the Night's Watch. Perhaps he was safer there, under the watchful eye of Lord Commander Mormont. Or perhaps not, if the threatened darkness was truly as vast as these loyalists claimed. Morning arrived in a blaze of sun that did little to warm Ned's spirits. The final day of the tourney was a blur of justs and feasting. Robert called for more wine, more laughter, oblivious to the tension gnawing at Ned's heart. When the festivities finally ended, the king pulled Ned aside, boasting of a grand hunt he planned in the Kingswood next month, urging Ned to attend. Ned nodded politely, not committing. They parted ways, with Robert returning to King's Landing in a raucous procession, while Ned began the journey back to Winterfell. All the while, his mind was consumed with the question: should he heed the call of these old Valyrian loyalists and their cryptic warnings, or bury the matter as a fantasy best left alone? Before leaving the Riverlands, Ned took a detour to speak with Ser Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, a man whose counsel he trusted. Though Ned did not reveal the entire truth, he hinted at rumors of a powerful threat stirring in the east, seeking the realm's downfall. The Blackfish, a pragmatic warrior, only shrugged. "The world is full of threats, my lord. We do what we can to guard our own lands and families. If you believe there's true danger, prepare as best you're able. But we cannot chase every phantom." That advice echoed in Ned's ears as he traveled north. On the final leg of the journey, as the familiar chill of the north embraced him, Ned decided he must see the truth for himself. He would sail with these Valyrian loyalists, or at least send a trustworthy representative. But who? Robb was needed at Winterfell. Jon was at the wall, and sending for him would raise too many questions. At last, Ned resolved that he himself would go. He would tell Robert he was traveling to inspect defenses in the north, which was true enough. From there, he could slip away to White Harbor, catch a ship under assumed pretenses, and sail for King's Landing in disguise. It was madness, but so were the times. When he reached Winterfell, the castle welcomed him like an old friend. Catelyn rushed to greet him, relief and warmth in her smile. But she sensed something weighed upon him and pressed him gently. Ned revealed only that grave tidings from across the narrow sea had reached him, tidings he had to investigate. He made it sound like a minor affair, a courtesy check on trade routes and potential threats. Catelyn's lips tightened with worry, but she trusted him enough not to pry further. In the Godswood, Ned knelt by the heart tree, its ancient face weeping red sap, and prayed for guidance. The wind whispered through the weirwood leaves, and in that rustling hush, he felt something ancient stirring, as if the old gods themselves listened. "Watch over my family," Ned murmured. "Grant me the strength to do what must be done." He did not know if the old gods answered, but he rose with renewed resolve. The next days were a flurry of preparations. He made arrangements for Robb to govern in his absence, with counsel from Maester Luwin and Ser Roderick Castle. He quietly gathered supplies, disguises, and enough gold to fund a journey. Each night he questioned himself anew. Was he truly doing the right thing? On the eve of his departure, Ned visited the crypts again, walking past the stone likenesses of long-dead Starks. He paused at Lyanna's statue, remembering her laughing eyes, her free spirit. The secrets of her child weighed on him. Jon Snow, half Targaryen, half Stark. If Rhaegar's blood was indeed in the boy, the truth pained him. Perhaps these loyalists were correct in believing that the wolf and the dragon shared some fated bond. He prayed it would never come to that, for Jon's sake. At last, in the cold pre-dawn hours, Ned slipped away. He rode with a small escort to White Harbor, claiming urgent business with Lord Manderly. The men who traveled with him suspected nothing amiss. Once in White Harbor, Ned quietly dismissed them, saying he would continue on alone for a brief journey by sea. They questioned him, but he invoked his right as Lord of Winterfell, and they obeyed. That night, Ned Stark boarded a merchant vessel bound for King's Landing. No one recognized him beneath the heavy cloak, and the ship's captain believed he was merely a wealthy northern merchant traveling for trade. Ned stood on the deck as the ship navigated away from White Harbor's docks, the moon overhead. The sea's salt air braced him, mingling with the fear and anticipation in his heart. In that moment, Eddard Stark crossed a threshold in his life. He was no longer just the steadfast warden of the North, the honorable lord sworn to keep the king's peace. He was stepping into the unknown, guided by an omen of dragons and direwolves entwined, and by the ominous promise that something unimaginable threatened the realm. As the sails caught the wind and the ship drifted into the darkness, Ned felt a surge of resolve. Winter was coming, yes, but perhaps a winter darker than any the realm had ever known. One born not of snow and ice, but of ancient flames. And he, Eddard Stark, would stand in its path no matter the cost. The voyage south was uneventful at first. The merchant vessel bore various wares: fur pelts from the north, salted fish, barrels of mead, intended for sale in the bustling markets of King's Landing. Ned kept mostly to himself, cloistered in his small cabin to avoid drawing attention. The The sailors assumed he was merely a taciturn northerner unaccustomed to sea travel. Beneath his cloak, Ned clutched the memory of that dragonglass dagger, safely hidden at Winterfell, yet it lingered in his mind as if still tugging at his hip. When they finally approached the capital after several weeks, the skyline of King's Landing came into view. Filthy, sprawling, alive with commerce and corruption alike. Ned disembarked quietly, paying the captain handsomely to ask no questions. He slipped into the city's winding streets, finding lodging in a modest inn near the waterfront. The stench of the harbor mingled with the clamor of sailors, dock workers, and hawkers. It reminded Ned of his previous time in King's Landing, when he had served as Robert's hand and nearly lost his life to Lannister intrigues. He moved with caution, keeping his hood low, mindful of gold cloaks on every corner. Word had spread that the king was at the Red Keep, hosting lavish feasts with half the lords of Westeros in attendance. It would be no easy matter to slip away unnoticed. Yet Ned had no intention of lingering. The Valyrian Loyalists had said a ship would depart on the first day of the new moon, carrying them toward the smoking sea. That was only a few days hence. Ned planned to keep a low profile until then. On his second night in the city, Ned took a calculated risk. Dressed plainly, he ventured into one of the seedier taverns near the docks, the Drunken Mermaid, a place he recalled from prior visits. There, after some discreet inquiries, he learned of a ship rumored to sail east without official permission, possibly heading to Lys or Volantis. Suspecting this might be the vessel he sought, Ned arranged to speak with the captain. A gruff, scarred man named Morrow, of the Basilisk Isles, sized Ned up with a wary gaze. Ned offered gold, enough to secure passage for himself alone. Morrow spat into a gutter. "We leave on the new moon, if the tide and the gods will it. Where we go is no matter of yours, so long as you pay up front." Ned nodded, handing over a small purse. "I need passage in secret. No questions asked." Morrow counted the coins and shrugged. "I don't ask a fish why it swims." Arrangements made, Ned departed, slipping into the alley's darkness. He could only hope this was indeed the ship carrying the Valyrian Loyalists, or at least would take him to the appointed meeting place. Otherwise, he might find himself alone in a foreign port with no answers. The day of departure arrived. Ned boarded the creaking vessel by night, along with a handful of other passengers who kept to themselves. By the light of a few torches, Ned recognized none of them. At first, he feared the entire quest had been a fool's errand. But soon, he spotted a slender figure who moved with a certain grace, silver blonde hair tucked beneath a dark hood. It was her, the woman from the Wolfswood. She met his eyes across the deck, offered a faint nod, then vanished below. Relief mingled with foreboding in Ned's chest. The journey was about to begin in earnest. Once they were out to sea, the captain gave them free rein to move about the deck, though the seas were rough and the men kept busy with ropes and sails. Ned remained aloof from the other passengers, though he spotted a few who might have been soldiers or mercenaries. One was a woman with scarred hands, presumably from years of wielding a blade. Another was a tall man with a shaved head and tattoos snaking up his neck, speaking in low Valyrian tones with a compatriot. Ned tried not to listen, but fragments of conversation reached his ears. Talk of harnessing old powers, forging new alliances. He felt a ripple of unease at their fervor. After the second day at sea, the silver-haired woman approached him. They stood by the railing, waves slapping the ship's hull. She studied Ned's face for a moment. "You came," she said quietly. "I half expected you to remain in Winterfell." Ned stared at the horizon. The waters stretched endlessly, gray and tumultuous. "If there is truth to your warnings, I could not ignore them. But make no mistake, I do this for the sake of the realm, not out of devotion to Valyria's memory." She inclined her head. "Your realm and ours may share a fate. If we fail, there will be no difference between North and South, or between Targaryen Loyalist and Baratheon Royalist." Her sincerity was unsettling. Ned's instincts told him she believed every word she said. "I will listen and I will observe," he said at last. "But I will not commit to anything blindly." "Fair enough," she said. "My name is Naeris. I descend from an ancient line of dragon lords who fled Valyria before the doom. Some say we are related to the Targaryens, others say we were a lesser house. None of that matters now, only the mission remains. Which is to retrieve what was lost, to awaken weapons forged by dragonfire, sealed deep in the smoking sea, even if we have to brave the cursed ruins of Valyria itself." She paused, voice dropping. The city of the ancestors stands in ruins, broken by earthquakes and volcanic fury, yet there are places where secrets lie untouched. The knowledge of binding, the forging of steel with sorcery. If we do not reclaim these arts, the force that stirs will grow unopposed. Ned frowned. "And you believe these weapons can be controlled? That they won't unleash another doom?" "It's a risk," Naeris admitted, "but a necessary one. Elsewise we stand defenseless. The darkness that stirs, it's not a single beast or army. It's more akin to a corruption, seeping out from cracks in the world, but anchored in the old magics. Valyrian steel might counter it, if wielded by those strong in will." Ned recalled ice, the ancestral sword of House Stark, and how its steel held an unearthly gleam. He wondered if these rumored weapons were truly so much more powerful. He looked at Naeris. "And what do you want of me?" She studied him, her gaze steady. "We believe the blood of the first men resonates with the old magics differently. The children of the forest, the White Walkers, your legends speak of ancient powers in the north. If we combine that heritage with Valyrian forging, we might create something entirely new. A new line of swords, or perhaps something beyond swords. And you, Eddard Stark, are the living guardian of that bloodline." It was a heavy thought. Ned was a practical man, not prone to illusions of grandeur. Yet something about Naeris' words struck a chord. He remembered the old tales of Bran the Builder, how the first men once made pacts with the children of the forest. Could the blood in his veins truly awaken something long dormant? "I make no promises," he repeated, turning away. That night, the ship plowed onward under star-swept skies, heading east across waters that grew progressively warmer. Days blurred into nights, as they skirted storms and avoided pirate-infested routes near the stepstones. The passengers kept largely to themselves, though a cautious camaraderie formed. Ned caught glimpses of the tall, tattooed man practicing sword drills on the foredeck, the scarred woman cleaning her blades. Others pored over old scrolls, perhaps Valyrian texts describing what they sought. Naeris moved among them, advising, encouraging, preparing them for what lay ahead. Ned felt a growing sense of disquiet. How many had pinned their hopes on these ancient legends? How many would follow them into the choking gloom of Valyria's ruins, never to return? Each evening, Ned retreated to a corner of the deck, gazing westward, picturing Winterfell's snow-capped towers. The realm he had vowed to protect seemed so far away now, as if lost behind a veil of foreign seas. Eventually, they reached the rocky coasts that bordered the Gulf of Grief, an expanse of water near Slaver's Bay. The captain set a course south, hugging the shoreline of Sithorios to avoid the worst perils. Rumors spoke of monstrous creatures in those jungles and fierce corsairs prowling the warm seas. One morning, a dense fog rolled in, obscuring the ship from horizon to horizon. Ned stood at the prow, straining his eyes. He felt as though they were sailing into a dream or a nightmare. The hull groaned beneath them, battered by waves that seemed unnaturally cold. Naeris came to stand by him. "We're close now," she said quietly. "Another day or two, and we'll reach the smoking sea." He nodded grimly. The smoking sea, those cursed waters that still fumed with volcanic vents and swirling mists where Valyria once stood proud. Tales claimed that ghosts roamed that place, that ships who ventured too close were lost forever. Even the free cities gave it a wide berth. Ned's heart pounded at the thought that they were about to test those legends firsthand. Sure enough, as the fog lifted, the coastline gave way to a desolate panorama of blackened rock and steaming fissures. The water took on a grayish hue, dotted with patches of unnatural color, rainbow sheens that might be oil or sulfur. The sky overhead darkened with clouds of ash that drifted from distant volcanic plumes. The crew muttered nervously, crossing themselves or invoking foreign gods for protection. Captain Morrow's jaw tightened. He called for the sails to be trimmed. The pace slowed as they entered the smoking sea. Sulfuric fumes stung the eyes and throat. The air felt strangely charged, like the aftermath of lightning. On the horizon, shapes loomed, broken towers of basalt, collapsed arches, a twisted labyrinth of black stone half-submerged in boiling waves. It was all that remained of Valyria, once the greatest city in the known world. Ned stood transfixed. Even in ruins, the city possessed a menacing grandeur. He thought of the Targaryens and the Dragon Lords who had wrought wonders here, forging swords and scepters that shaped the world. Now it was a graveyard, swallowed by the doom centuries ago. Yet something still lingered, an echo of power or dread. The hair on Ned's neck stood on end. Naerys and her followers prepared a smaller boat to row ashore. The main ship would wait at a safer distance, unwilling to risk the shallows. Ned joined them, sword belted at his side, though he doubted mere steel would guard against any supernatural forces rumored to dwell here. The scarred woman, the tattooed man, and 3 others climbed into the boat, along with Naerys. 8 in total, including Ned. They lowered themselves over the side into the swirling sea. Rowing proved arduous, the waters thick with murk. Strange currents tugged at the oars, as though something beneath the surface yearned to drag them under. The stench of sulfur and decay grew more potent with every yard. At last, they reached a jagged shore littered with broken pylons and shards of obsidian. Steam hissed from cracks in the earth. Underfoot, the ground felt warm, trembling with the restless pulse of volcanic activity. "We must travel inland," Naerys said, pointing toward a half-collapsed gateway of black stone. "There's a tunnel network below the city, where the Dragon Lords once performed their great workings. That is where the relics lie." They moved cautiously, picking their way through the ruins. The basalt blocks seemed to loom overhead like the bones of dead giants. A hush reigned, broken only by the distant rumble of molten rock far below. Now and then, the wind whispered through cracks, echoing like ghostly lamentations. Ned could almost feel eyes on him, though no living thing was in sight. In the heart of the fallen city, they found a massive courtyard, dominated by the shattered remains of a monumental statue, perhaps a dragon or a Valyrian king. It lay in pieces, wings snapped off, head severed. Naerys paused, bowing her head as if in respect. Then, wordlessly, she led them to a steep stair descending into darkness. The steps were worn smooth by centuries, and a foul, hot wind rose from the depths. They descended single file, lanterns held high. The walls bore faint carvings of dragon sigils and swirling flames. Ned's heart thundered. He had never believed in ghosts, but here, the past felt alarmingly present. Each breath tasted of ash. At times, the staircase opened into wide caverns with pillars carved into the shapes of serpentine dragons. At others, the ceiling pressed low, forcing them to crouch. Eventually, they reached a corridor lined with iron doors, half-rusted and buckled. Naerys halted. Beyond these chambers lie the forges, where Valyrian steel was crafted, or so the texts say. "We must find the antechamber of the Ebony Anvil. That is where the relics were stored." She gestured to the group. "Remain vigilant. Some ancient wards may still be in place." One by one, they pried open the doors. Inside, the spaces were silent crypts of corroded machinery. Massive bellows, anvils, channels for molten metal. The place reeked of old magic. Ned's lantern flickered, and in its glow, he saw strange runes etched on the walls. He glanced at Naerys. Her face glistened with sweat, but her eyes shone with a kind of reverent awe. In a far corner, they found the Ebony Anvil, a squat block of black metal, marred by cracks but still imposing. Naerys and the others approached it gingerly. Runes in Valyrian glyphs covered its surface, some chipped away by time. The scarred woman hissed in amazement, tracing a hand over them. The tall, tattooed man knelt, bowing his head as though in prayer. Ned hung back, uncertain. He felt the prickling sense that they were trespassing in a tomb, disturbing powers better left alone. But he had come this far to learn the truth. If these relics existed, perhaps they were the realm's best hope against the rumored threat. Naerys produced a small dagger, Valyrian steel, from the sheen of it. She held it above a circular depression in the anvil's surface. "We must unlock the wards," she murmured. "This anvil was keyed to the blood of Valyrian dragon lords. It will require a sacrifice." Before Ned could protest, she pressed the dagger's tip into her palm, drawing blood. Crimson droplets fell into the depression, sizzling. The runes along the anvil flared with an eerie red glow, illuminating the chamber in dancing shadows. A rumble resonated, as if the earth itself groaned. Dust rained from the ceiling. The others gasped or muttered incantations in low voices. The ebony anvil began to shift. With a grinding screech, it split down the middle, revealing a hollow compartment inside. Resting within were 3 objects swathed in what looked like dragonhide wraps. Naerys carefully lifted one out, unwrapping it to reveal a sword of unmistakable Valyrian steel, its blade black as midnight, etched with swirling patterns of crimson and silver. Its hilt was fashioned into a twisting dragon, rubies for eyes. A tangible aura pulsed from it, making Ned's skin prickle. "Zeger," Naerys breathed, naming the sword as if it were a living thing. She passed it to the tall, tattooed man, who cradled it with reverence. Another sword followed, similarly dark but inlaid with gold filigree. The scarred woman accepted it, eyes glimmering. Finally, Naerys lifted a smaller, curved blade, more a dagger than a sword, but with the same haunting craftsmanship. She held it out to Ned. "Take it. We brought you here for this moment." He hesitated. The blade seemed to almost hum in her grasp. The swirling patterns on the steel reminded him of glimpses he had seen on that dragonglass weapon from the Wolfswood. He reached out, hand trembling slightly, and wrapped his fingers around the hilt. A jolt ran through his arm, not painful, but startling. For a moment, the distant clang of hammers and roar of dragons echoed in his mind, as if carried across centuries. "It's called Winter's Roar," Naerys said softly. "Forged in the last days of Valyria, intended as a gift to the Starks, or so the legends say. Blood of the first men, bound with the fires of the dragon." Ned's breath caught in his throat. The notion that such a weapon was ever meant for his forebears was staggering. As he held it, he felt a subtle resonance deep in his bones, as though it recognized him. Or perhaps it was all in his imagination. He tightened his grip, unsure whether to cast it aside or clutch it tighter. "You'd entrust this to me?" he asked. Naerys smiled faintly. "It's yours by right, Lord Stark. A sword of ice and fire, in the hands of one who can wield both. It will be needed in the battles to come." Before Ned could respond, a thunderous crash shook the chamber. The anvil's glow flickered, and cracks snaked across the walls. Stone blocks shifted, grinding together. A tremor of panic seized them all as dust swirled from above. "The wards are collapsing," the scarred woman shouted. "We must go." In a frantic rush, they hurried from the chamber, swords in hand, relics clutched to their chests. The tunnel quaked, forcing them to weave around fallen stones. Steam hissed from newly opened fissures. Twice, the ground lurched so violently that Ned stumbled, nearly dropping the blade. But somehow he pressed on, driven by a fierce will to survive. They emerged into the courtyard just as a section of ruined tower collapsed, sending a cascade of rubble tumbling. The quake subsided momentarily, and a hush fell, but it was not relief. In the gloom, shapes shifted among the debris. Shadows moved with unnatural grace, their forms uncertain, like silhouettes torn from nightmares. Eyes glowed with malice. A wave of dread swept over the group. A monstrous figure lunged. A twisted humanoid shape with blackened, ashen skin, its mouth yawning impossibly wide. The tattooed man shouted, slashing with his new Valyrian steel sword. The blade cut through the creature as though slicing fog, and the thing melted into a swirl of dark vapor. Others emerged from the cracks, half-seen horrors that flickered in and out of focus. Ned's heart pounded. He raised Winter's roar, unsure if it would prove any more real against these apparitions. When a shadow thing launched itself at him, he slashed instinctively. The blade sang through the air. To his astonishment, the creature recoiled, screeching in a high, piercing wail. Then it dissolved into sooty smoke. "Move!" Nerys called. "They won't stop coming." With no choice, they fled, hacking and slashing at the apparitions that pursued them. The scarred woman's golden-inlaid sword blazed with a fierce luminescence, each stroke banishing the horrors. Nerys flung out her arms, chanting words in High Valyrian, summoning flickers of pale fire that seemed to drive the creatures back. Each confrontation drained their strength. By the time they reached the shoreline, the group was panting, cuts and scrapes marring their skin. But the menacing shadows had receded, as if held back by the boundary of land and sea. The small boat was still there, bobbing in churning waves. They piled in, pushing off with desperate haste. Water sloshed over the gunwales as they rowed madly away. Behind them, the ruined city spewed plumes of ash and steam, the last echoes of the quake rumbling like distant thunder. Clouds of black smoke drifted across the skyline, and in that roiling mass, Ned thought he saw flickers of movement, perhaps illusions of drifting shadows or ephemeral spirits of Valyria. He shuddered, turning his eyes away. Reaching the main ship, they scrambled aboard, drawing startled exclamations from the crew. Captain Morrow gaped at their battered state, but Nerys thrust a coin pouch into his hand. "We sail now," she ordered. "Get us away from these waters." "Are you mad?" Morrow hissed. "The seas are boiling, the winds foul. We risk death or worse." Nerys' glare silenced him. "Sail, or I swear we'll feed your bones to these cursed shores." Grumbling, the captain barked orders, and the ship lurched into motion, sails snapping. Ned sagged against the railing, chest heaving. Winter's roar felt impossibly heavy in his hand, its power both exhilarating and terrifying. He exchanged a look with the others. The tall, tattooed man's sword was dark with Stygian patterns, the scarred woman's blade shining with an otherworldly gleam. They had claimed a piece of Valyria's lost might. When the city's outline finally faded into the distance, the group assembled on the deck. Their exhaustion was palpable, but there was also a strange elation in the air. They had succeeded in retrieving the relics somehow. Yet the price was too high to ignore. The visions, the shadowy foes, the quake that nearly buried them all. It was a reminder that such power did not come without a cost. Nerys leaned against the railing, hair whipping in the wind, her eyes on Ned's blade. "We have them," she said softly. "Now we must master them. The forging is only the beginning. The weaving of wards, the marriage of northern magic with Valyrian fire, that remains. And the darkness that stirs will not wait." Ned ran a thumb along Winter's roar's hilt, feeling a faint warmth, as though the steel itself lived. He thought of the White Walkers rumored to stir beyond the wall, and the threat these loyalists believed was rising from Valyria's depths. Perhaps both were part of the same tapestry of doom. A tremor of foreboding coursed through him. "I still don't know what I've gotten myself into," he admitted. "But if what we saw in those ruins is any sign, we've awakened something or drawn its attention." Nerys nodded grimly. "We must be ready, Lord Stark. The realm depends on it." A realm ignorant of their peril, Ned thought. Robert, the Lannisters, the Tyrells, the Martells. None of them had any inkling of what truly lurked in the shadows. And if Ned tried to warn them, would they even listen? The secrets of Valyria, the forging of arcane steel, the half-glimpsed horrors in the smoking sea. It all sounded like madness. Yet as he looked at the sword in his hand, at the faint swirl of runes on its blade, Ned felt the weight of destiny pressing down. Once, he had believed that victory in Robert's rebellion would ensure peace for the realm. Now he saw how narrow that vision was. Greater forces were at work, older than any mortal line of kings. If the realm was to be saved, it would require more than swords and alliances. It would need the union of ancient powers, the bridging of old enmities, and the unwavering will of those who refused to bend before the storm. Eddard Stark might not be a king or a dragon lord, But he was something else. A man bound by honor, guided by a heart that would not forsake duty, no matter how terrifying that duty became. He clenched Winter's roar, steeling himself for the trials ahead. The journey home would be long, fraught with danger. But when next he returned to Westeros, he would not come empty-handed. He would bring a glimmer of hope forged in the darkest crucible of the ancient world. High on the mast, a lookout shouted that the wind had changed, favoring their escape from the smoking sea. The sails caught the breeze, and the ship surged forward, leaving the haunted ruins behind. Ned gazed back one last time, seeing only a haze of ash and steam rising on the horizon. Deep in his heart, he whispered a silent prayer to the old gods, and perhaps to the new as well, that the realm would be strong enough to face what was coming. In that moment, he understood that his life's course had shifted irrevocably. The North still called him, but now so too did a duty that spanned seas and centuries. Valyria's legacy lived on, no longer dormant, and Eddard Stark, the wolf amidst dragons, would bear that legacy into the storms of tomorrow, for the sake of all he held dear, and for the realm that was not yet lost. Eddard Stark stood at the prow of the ship, watching plumes of ash fade into the distance as the vessel fled the smoking sea's cursed waters. His muscles still trembled with a mingled rush of dread and triumph, the memory of what they had unleashed in the ancient ruins clinging to him like a cold sweat. Winter's roar rested against his hip, bound securely in its sheath. A part of him longed to discard the sword, to let it sink into those churning gray waters so that no one might ever wield its fearful power. But another part of him knew that this was precisely why he had come, and why he must carry it back to Westeros. The watchers on the crew, both loyalists of Naerys' cause and simple mariners, spoke in hushed, awed tones of the horrors they had glimpsed on shore. Some insisted they had seen moving shapes, half-formed, flitting along shattered columns and the black edges of collapsed towers. Others claimed that the swirling steam rising from ruptured fissures in the earth had taken on the outlines of phantom dragons, coiling and uncoiling with slow, sinuous malice. Eddard Stark tried not to dwell on those tales, but they hammered at his thoughts all the same, refusing to recede. He caught sight of Naerys leaning over the starboard rail. Strands of silver-blonde hair had come loose from the tie at the back of her neck, whipping across her face. Her eyes were fixed on the ruined horizon, as though she too were still enthralled by the grim wonder of Valyria. The ancient swords were locked away in the ship's strongest chest, except for the small dagger now at Ned's side. Winter's roar, narrow and lethal, forged in fire and shaped, so rumor said, by the shared blood of dragonlords and the first men. Somehow, it felt more substantial than a mere blade. It was a key, or so Naerys believed, able to unlock defenses or rouse archaic wards in the north. Eddard was still half convinced it was all an elaborate fancy, yet the memory of that monstrous shadow dissolving at his strike clung to him, as visceral as any battlefield victory. The tall, tattooed man, whom Naerys called Malthus, approached Ned with careful steps. His new sword, Zeger, had a hilt shaped like an entwined serpent, rubies for eyes. He had fastened it in a harness slung crosswise over his back. He inclined his head, a gesture of respect that might have been foreign to him before these events. "Lord Stark," he said in a surprisingly gentle voice, "are you faring well?" Many men tremble for hours after breathing those fumes. Ned forced a tired smile. "I have weathered worse nights, though not many." He glanced around. A handful of the Loyalists, perhaps Sellswords or devout Valyrian scholars, had retreated below deck to nurse their wounds. "We've lost no one, by the gods' grace." Malthus nodded, expression solemn. "Those shadows, in the courtyard, I have heard whispers that they are not truly spirits but living curses. Echoes of the doom that feed on the folly of the living, drawn to Valyrian steel like moths to a flame." Ned gave a faint nod, unsure what to believe. The realm of magic and curses was foreign territory to him, a man of the north who trusted in steel and cold discipline. "Is that why these swords were sealed away?" he asked softly. "Because possessing such weapons risks attracting these shadows?" Malthus looked away for a moment, gazing at a swirl of foam cresting near the hull. So the lore claims, the ebony anvil was not just a forge, it was a ward, a way to contain both the blessings and the curses of the steel. Now that we have taken the relics from it, those wards lie broken, and the city's nightmares roam free. There was a haunted quality to his voice. Yet this is the only course. If the realm is to be saved, we must risk it. Eddard swallowed. Let us hope that risk is not in vain. He left the tattooed man by the rail and made his way aft, passing knots of sailors coiling rope and adjusting rigging. He sensed their wary stares. No doubt many thought it madness to have ventured so close to the smoking sea, let alone landing on those shores. But gold was gold, and Naerys had promised them triple their usual fare. Fear receded when a man's purse swelled. Late that evening, with the ship cutting steadily through calmer waters, Naerys gathered the Loyalists on the quarterdeck. Ned joined them at her insistence, though his instincts told him he was entering another labyrinth of secrets. A single lantern hung from a hook, swaying in the gentle wind. The group arranged themselves in a loose circle. Naerys, Malthus, the scarred woman named Guyana, and 3 others whose names Ned had overheard, Tavos, Miranda, and Simon. All eyes turned to Ned as he approached. Naerys' voice was low, resonant. We have done the impossible, reclaiming 3 of Valyria's greatest relics. But they are useless if we cannot harness them. The forging arts are lost to time, and the wards that once bound the swords to worthy hands have crumbled. Her gaze fell on Ned. This is why we needed you, Lord Stark. Old songs say that in the forging of the North's mightiest blades, the weirwoods played a role. Their sap was mixed with the metal, the power of the old gods lending strength to the steel. Ned looked at the glimmer of winter's roar at his side. Even if that's true, what can I do? I am no sorcerer. She smiled, though it held a trace of sadness. You do not need to be a sorcerer. You are a Stark. Blood of the first men runs in your veins, the line that once communed with the children of the forest. In the crypts beneath Winterfell lie more secrets than the realm suspects. The weirwood grove in your godswood is older than the wall itself. If we bring these blades there, perhaps we can kindle the wards anew, rebind the old magics to living steel, forging a final defense. Guyana spoke up in her rasping voice. And if that fails, or if the old gods ignore us? Naerys gave a small shrug. Then the swords remain potent steel, but lack the deeper power that was once promised. We cannot fight a creeping darkness with plain blades alone, no matter how fine the metal. She paused, letting that sink in, then turned again to Ned. I ask your leave, my lord, to accompany you back to the north, to stand in that ancient place, amid the face of the weirwood, and attempt what we must. Ned's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of these strangers, Valyrian loyalists, sorcerers, or whatever they might be, treading the hallowed ground of Winterfell's gods would felt wrong. Yet was that not precisely why he had come? He glanced at Winter's roar and remembered the terror in that ruined courtyard, the shapes that swarmed them. If this threat was real, then his duty to the realm demanded he see it through. If you come to my home, he said, you do so as my guests. You will respect our ways and keep your secrets if you must, but cause no trouble among my people. Naerys inclined her head. We will honor your hospitality, Lord Stark. We come not as invaders but as allies. The others murmured agreement. Ned's gaze flicked around the circle, taking in each face. Some eyes shone with fervent devotion, others with skepticism or fatigue. Still, it seemed they all believed in this mission. He took a breath, bracing himself for the burdens to come. Then I will bring you to Winterfell, he said, and we will see if the old gods answer your call. The days that followed were a haze of tension and monotony. The ship sailed west, skirting the coastlines of Sithorios and then heading north around the Stepstones. They avoided known pirate dens. Captain Morrow seemed eager to lose no more men or time than necessary. Now and then, other vessels were sighted in the distance, but none drew close enough to hail them. Eddard's heart yearned for the green and gray of the north, for the safe stone walls of Winterfell and the crisp bite of the air on his face. He spent long hours alone on the deck, or in a cramped cabin the captain had grudgingly ceded to him once Naerys increased their payment again. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of the smoking sea. In these visions, he walked alone through Valyria's molten corridors, hearing the dripping of water and the slow tread of unseen watchers. Sometimes Lyanna's voice called to him from around a corner, echoing in the gloom, or he glimpsed the figure of his father, Rickard Stark, standing beside a half-collapsed forge. Then the darkness would writhe with serpentine shapes, and a dragon's roar would shake the walls, snapping Ned awake with a start. When the ship finally approached the coast of Dorne, the crew sighed in relief. Naerys had decided it safer to make port at Sunspear briefly, to resupply. The scalding Dornish sun was a sharp contrast to the ashen gloom they had sailed in not so long ago. Ned stood on the deck as they pulled into harbor, peering across a bay dotted with fishing boats and merchant vessels. The towers of Sunspear rose in the distance, tan stone reflecting golden light. Memories of the war flickered through Ned's mind. How Prince Oberyn Martell had been a ferocious adversary in the rebellion's final days. How Elia Martell's death had left lingering bitterness. But times had changed, or so the realm liked to pretend. They disembarked in small groups to avoid drawing too much notice. Naerys wore a hood, which concealed the silver of her hair, though a few passing sailors glanced curiously in her direction. Dornish harbor officials took note of their arrival but were placated by Captain Morrow's coin. Ned was content to remain on the docks while the crew procured fresh water, salted meat, and fruit. He watched the swirl of colors and fabrics. Dornish men wearing light robes, veiled women carrying baskets of dates and lemons, guards in burnished helms shaped like snake heads. Now and then, the Loyalists joined him, glancing around with open curiosity or else wariness. Gyanna spat onto the sand. "This land is too hot. My sword arm sweats without a fight. Best keep your sword sheathed here," Ned said quietly, eyeing a pair of Dornish spearmen walking by. "We're not looking for trouble." Gyanna grunted and moved off. Malthus, more reserved, asked after the local markets, hoping to find a new whetstone for his blade. Naerys lingered at Ned's side, shoulders tense. "We need only a day, perhaps less, to secure what we need. Then we'll sail for the Stormlands or even around the Reach, whichever path is safer. We've come too far to risk confrontation." That evening, they retreated to the ship. The port's bustle continued even after sunset, torches lining the docks. Ned found a place near the prow to sit and muse. In the distance, the faint music of lutes and drums carried across the bay. It reminded him of King's Landing's chaotic nights. The thought made him uneasy. Too often, city festivities masked undercurrents of danger and intrigue. Early the next morning, they set sail again, slipping out of Sunspear under a hazy dawn sky. A brisk wind from the east pushed them along the coast. Though the crew relaxed somewhat, Ned remained wary. Travel in these waters was never wholly safe, and word could spread about a strange band crossing the seas. If a rival faction in Westeros learned of these Valyrian relics, they might try to seize them. Ned thought of the Lannisters especially. Tywin Lannister had always been a man who coveted power and prestige. A rumor of ancient swords might entice him, or so Ned feared. Yet as the days passed uneventfully, Ned allowed a sliver of hope to creep into his heart. Perhaps they would reach White Harbor without incident, from which Ned could escort Naerys and the others to Winterfell in relative secrecy. The king's attention was often turned toward more immediate pleasures: wine, hunts, tourneys. With luck, Robert would remain ignorant of Ned's more clandestine doings. The realm's safety might depend on it. Gradually, the coastline shifted, the waters growing cooler, the breezes sharper. They passed the broken peninsula of the Broken Arm and continued north. Malthus occasionally joined Ned by the rail to gaze at the changing seascape. "My people rarely see land so green," he said quietly, gesturing to the western shores where pine forests thickened. "Valyria was all black rock and towering wonders, and our exodus took us to Essos. It's strange to think we will soon set foot in a place as cold and stark as the north." Ned gave a nod. "You may find it inhospitable, but to me it is home." Malthus smiled, the tattoos on his scalp shifting. A fortress of stone amid the snow, with wolves howling in the dark. I have heard the songs. They say the Starks are kings in their own land, whether or not they wear crowns. We are but wardens now, Ned replied, though a flicker of pride stirred in him at the old legends. Our duty is to guard the north, and perhaps more if you folk speak true. A few days later, they sighted the mouth of the White Knife, the wide, sluggish river that led to White Harbor. By then, the temperature had dropped noticeably. Crew members donned heavier cloaks. Gianna and Simon, both from warmer climes, grumbled about their chapped faces. Naeris simply drew her hood tighter around her silver hair, studying the coastline with a thoughtful gaze. At last, the ship slowed as it navigated the approach to White Harbor. Ned felt a jolt of familiarity upon glimpsing the city's pale stone walls. House Manderley's banner, white merman on a blue-green field, fluttered from the towers. The harbor bustled with Westerosi cogs and carracks, merchant vessels from the free cities, and fishing boats returning with their morning catches. Compared to the exotic ports they had seen, White Harbor had a quieter dignity, though it was no less a place of trade and rumor. Captain Morrow, gruff as ever, barked orders to bring the ship into port. Naeris joined Ned at the gangplank. "Shall we all go ashore?" she asked. "Or do we risk drawing suspicion with so large a group?" Ned surveyed the docks. "I suggest you and I disembark with Malthus and Gianna and one or two others. The rest can remain on the ship or slip into the city discreetly. House Manderley is a loyal bannerman, but Lord Wyman is curious by nature. If he senses something unusual, he may pry." Their plan took shape swiftly. Tavos and Miranda agreed to stay behind. Simon would keep watch on the chest containing the relic swords. White Harbor's officials were less suspicious than their Dornish counterparts. After a brief inspection and an exchange of coin, the ship was granted a berth along the western quay. The group ventured onto the docks. Fishermen hauled nets brimming with silver trout, gulls shrieked overhead, and the smell of salt mingled with that of fresh pine from rafts of timber being floated downstream. Cloaks drawn, they picked their way past warehouses and small taverns until they reached a quieter corner of the quay. There, Ned requested a messenger to carry word to Lord Wyman Manderley that Eddard Stark had arrived, traveling incognito on urgent business. Until the messenger returned, they waited in the shade, glancing about at the city's bustle. Naeris seemed composed, though a certain tension radiated from her. Gianna, on the other hand, wore a faint sneer at the damp chill in the air. When Lord Wyman's men arrived, they did so with a respectful bow. The men bore the insignia of House Manderley upon their cloaks, and their captain approached Ned with a polite greeting. "My Lord Stark, we were not expecting you so soon. If you wish, Lord Wyman would be honored to receive you at Newcastle." Ned shook his head. "I thank him, but my errand cannot wait. I need horses and supplies to return to Winterfell at once. If Lord Wyman can arrange that, I will be grateful. I will come to see him properly when time allows." The captain hesitated. No doubt Lord Wyman would prefer a comfortable feast and a chance to gossip. Yet Ned's authority was unassailable in his own domain, and so the man bowed again. "At once, my lord. It may take a few hours to procure enough mounts." "See to it," Ned said, and the group parted ways. Naeris arched an eyebrow. "You do not fear offending your bannerman?" Ned sighed. "I trust Lord Wyman not to take offense where none is intended. He knows me well enough, but if I linger, he'll ask questions I cannot yet answer. Better to slip away quietly." They passed some time in a small alley near the fish market, taking care not to draw attention. Gianna paced, rubbing her arms against the chill. Malthus peered curiously at the local wares: casks of salted cod, barrels of pickled herring, lumps of pale cheese from the northern pastures. Naeris spoke quietly to Ned, her voice almost lost in the swirl of the crowd. "I wonder about the dreams you've had," she said. "Do they trouble you still?" Ned frowned, recalling the half-remembered nightmares of dragons and crypts. "They do. Each night, it seems I wander a labyrinth of black stone. Sometimes I see flickers of fire, or hear the howling of wolves. If I believed in prophecies, I might say the old gods are trying to speak to me. Her gaze was understanding, her tone sympathetic. Magic rarely manifests so plainly. It twists and hints and offers half-glimpses. I would not dismiss these dreams, my lord. He let out a breath. I do not dismiss them, nor do I wish to depend on them. My path is set regardless. Eventually, a line of horses arrived, led by Manderley men. With them came a supply cart filled with provisions, dried meats, sacks of grain, and jugs of fresh water. Ned thanked the men graciously and instructed them that he would lead the party north himself. At the last moment, he considered leaving some of the Valyrian Loyalists behind to avoid suspicion, but then decided that stealth was not a perfect option anyway. Better to keep the group together for now under his watchful eye. They rode out through the city gates, forging a path up the King's Road toward Winterfell. The countryside rolled past in a patchwork of farmland and low hills, dotted with small hamlets. Autumn was in the air, and the leaves had begun to turn. Before long, they would be falling in earnest, a prelude to the long winter. Ned wondered what changes had occurred at Winterfell in his absence. Would Catelyn greet him with relief or alarm when she saw the strange company trailing behind him? Each night, they camped off the road in quiet clearings. Ned and Naerys took turns standing watch, along with Malthus and Gyanna. Sometimes they spoke in low tones of practical matters, how best to present their mission at Winterfell, how to keep the relic swords discreet. Other times, they simply shared the silent vigil, wrapped in cloaks beneath a canopy of stars. A hush seemed to fall over the land as they pressed north, as if the very wind waited. On the 6th day, they reached Moat Cailin, a ruined fortress perched in the swamps that guarded the entrance to the north. Though half the towers were collapsed and the walls overgrown, Moat Cailin remained a formidable choke point. Its watchmen recognized Ned instantly, and they bowed as he passed, casting suspicious glances at his companions. Ned offered curt greetings, moving swiftly on. He felt a pang of nostalgia, recalling his father's stories of how the first men once held Moat Cailin against all comers. The North had many such relics of the past, steeped in legends too ancient to separate truth from myth. And now, here he was, harboring relics of Valyria that might threaten the realm's future or save it. 2 days later, they glimpsed the high wooden walls and watchtowers of Winterfell's outer perimeter rising over the horizon. Smoke curled from the chimneys, signifying the kitchens were busy. The fields and forests around the castle bore the fading colors of autumn. Ned felt his chest tighten at the sight. No matter how far he traveled, Winterfell was always home, its presence a steady comfort amid the swirling uncertainties of the world. They rode up to the gates, the guards straightening in astonishment at the sight of their lord returned without warning. Jory Castle was atop the ramparts and rushed down at once, face lit with relief. "My lord," he greeted, clasping Ned's arm. "We feared for your safety. You left so suddenly after Harrenhal." Ned gave a somber nod. "All is well, Jory, but I need your discretion. My companions are guests and must be treated with respect. No word of their presence goes beyond the walls for now." "Understood." Jory looked uncertain but inclined his head. "As you command, my lord." They entered the courtyard, hooves clopping on worn cobblestones. Stable hands came forth to tend the horses. Servants gawked at Naerys' silver hair and the exotic looks of Malthus' tattoos. Gyanna scowled at the curious eyes, while Ned quickly dismounted. At once, Robb Stark emerged from within, the beginnings of a youthful beard along his jawline, eyes bright with relief. Behind him came Bran and Arya, with Sansa trailing more cautiously. "Father!" Bran called, running up. Arya followed, a grin stretching across her face. Ned allowed a brief smile to break through his stern facade as he set a hand on Bran's shoulder and pulled Arya into a short embrace. "It's good to see you," he murmured. "Where is your mother?" Robb answered, "Inside, seeing to matters. We didn't expect you." Their voices trailed off as their gazes flicked to the strangers behind Ned. Malthus and Naerys stood close, letting Ned take the lead, though their posture was wary. Ned cleared his throat. There is much to discuss, but not in the courtyard. Robb, help me settle our guests in the eastern wing. Ensure they have privacy and comfort. Arya, Bran, go find your lessons. We will speak this evening. Arya frowned, clearly vexed at being dismissed. Bran bit his lip, curious, but a sharp look from their father quieted them, and they withdrew. Ned led Naerys and the others across the courtyard, ignoring the low murmurs of the servants. Robb accompanied them, offering a polite nod or wave to any guards who stared too long. Inside the keep, Ned found a suite of modest chambers seldom used except for visiting bannermen. They were simple but clean, with thick walls and a door that locked securely from within. That would suffice for the moment. Once the Loyalists had their assigned rooms, Ned withdrew to find Catelyn. He passed the main hall, where servants were preparing for the midday meal, and found her in her solar, conferring with Maester Luwin. She turned at his entrance, surprise and relief warring on her features. "Ned," she breathed, crossing the room to clasp his hands. "You've returned. Why no word? The ravens bring only rumors of a ship from the east." Ned squeezed her hands gently. "I had no means to send a raven without risking trouble. There is much to explain, but I would tell it once, not 1,000 times. Let us gather tonight with Maester Luwin and Ser Rodrik. I must also request your understanding, Cat. I have brought guests whose presence must remain a secret. They are no threat to us, I swear, but they carry knowledge that the realm may soon need." He saw her eyes sharpen with concern, but she nodded. "If it is your will, my lord." A small pang of guilt moved through Ned at the formality in her tone. He had kept too many secrets from Catelyn, yet some burdens belonged to him alone. He could not reveal certain truths, not about Jon Snow's parentage, nor the deeper mysteries of Valyrian conspiracies, without risking dire consequences. But it felt as though a reckoning was drawing near, and for better or worse, all these secrets might soon collide. He left her with an apologetic kiss on the cheek and descended to the courtyard once more. The day's sunshine was waning, long shadows stretching across the stone. The faint clang of steel echoed from the training yard, where some of the Stark men-at-arms sparred. Winterfell's rhythms carried on, steady as the heart of the north. That evening, Ned convened a small gathering in a lesser hall, one used for private councils. Catelyn and Maester Luwin were there, along with Ser Rodrik Castle and Robb, who as Ned's heir deserved to hear at least part of the tale. Naerys came, flanked by Malthus and Gyanna. The hush in the room was palpable as they took their seats around a rough oak table. Torchlight flickered on the walls, throwing elongated shadows. Ned began. "I know this may come as a shock, but I have traveled across the narrow sea. Farther than that, in fact. These people you see with me are Valyrian loyalists of a sort. They claim that an ancient threat stirs, one that once toppled Valyria itself. To combat it, they sought lost weapons. Valyrian steel relics said to have been locked away since before the Doom." He paused, feeling the weight of half-belief and doubt around the table. Ser Rodrik's mustache twitched in confusion. Maester Luwin adjusted the chain around his neck, eyes wide. Catelyn's expression was a study in controlled alarm, while Robb simply looked astonished. Naerys spoke next, voice calm but full of quiet intensity. "We found these relics in the very ruins of Valyria, braving curses and horrors that linger still. Lord Stark saw them with his own eyes. One such blade he carries, a dagger known as Winter's Roar, forged with the blood of your forefathers, so the stories go." A ripple of reaction passed through the listeners. Ned unsheathed the dagger and laid it on the table. Torchlight danced across the swirling patterns in the steel, and more than one person drew a sharp breath. Luwin reached out with trembling curiosity but stopped just shy of touching it. "The craftsmanship," he murmured. "This is beyond the usual Valyrian steel. The color is darker, the pattern unusual." Gyanna cut in, her voice rough. "We came here because only in the north can these blades be awakened to their full purpose. They need wards, forged in the old god's domain. The first men bound runes to their iron. The Dragon Lords shaped steel with sorcery. Together they made wonders." Robb leaned forward, half in fascination, half in disbelief. Wards? Magic? I thought such things were the stuff of children's tales. Ned took a measured breath. So did I, but I have seen enough to question that belief. If even half of what they claim is true, we must try to strengthen these weapons, if only to see for ourselves. Maester Luwin, ever rational, tried to gather his composure. My lord, if these swords were sealed, might it not be for good reason? The old tales mention that meddling in Valyrian sorcery can invite doom. His gaze flicked to Naerys and her companions. Forgive me, but how can we be certain you do not serve a darker purpose yourselves? Naerys inclined her head politely. We are descendants of those who fled Valyria, who saw the doom firsthand. We have no wish to repeat it here. This threat we speak of, call it a creeping shadow or a corruption, it will not spare Westeros simply because men close their eyes. Already, we have seen signs that it seeks to break free from the confines of Valyria. The wards that kept it in check for centuries grow brittle. Ser Roderick's voice was wary. And King Robert? Does he know of this? Ned answered firmly. He does not, nor do I intend to tell him, yet. He would think it treason or madness, and the realm is not prepared for another war, let alone a threat from beyond its borders. He tapped Winter's roar. This dagger alone might be taken as proof of Targaryen sympathies. Robert's hatred for the Targaryen line could cloud his judgment, to our peril. Silence followed as they considered this. Catelyn's eyes were fixed on Ned, a storm of questions visible in her gaze. At length she drew a breath. You risk much by harboring them, and yet I trust your judgment, Ned. You have never been one for flights of fancy. If you believe there is danger, I will stand with you. Her words touched him, but he also felt the invisible gulf between them. So many secrets unspoken. He gave a nod. Thank you, Cat. Then he turned to Maester Luwin. We must attempt to combine whatever knowledge we have of the First Men's forging with the knowledge these Loyalists bring of Valyrian steel. Tomorrow I would have you and them examine the lower vaults under the Great Keep. Among the old scrolls we may find references to the forging of ice or other relics. We also need to plan a rite in the Godswood, to see if the old gods might bestow their blessing or power, if such a thing is even possible. Maester Luwin paled slightly but nodded. I will do all I can, my lord. Naerys exchanged a glance with Malthus, and then bowed her head in acknowledgement. We are grateful. We know this is not easy, to place your faith in strangers. But the day may come when you will be glad these swords are ours and not in the hands of those who would misuse them. The meeting adjourned shortly after. Catelyn lingered once the others had left, her arms folded. Ned waited, expecting the wave of questions. They came quietly. You have gambled more than your own life, Ned. You gambled our children's futures, inviting these dangerous mysteries into our home. Are you certain it was the right choice? He rested a hand on her shoulder, voice hushed. I do not know, but I have seen terrors I cannot explain. Cat, if even half of this threat is real, turning them away would damn us all. I ask you to trust me. She studied him, her eyes reflecting concern and love in equal measure. Always. That night, Ned walked the corridors of Winterfell, found the lonely hush comforting in its familiarity. The walls smelled of old stone and the faint tang of the hot springs that warmed the castle floors. He went to the armory, pushing open the heavy door to check on his own sword, Ice, which was kept in a place of honor. The wide blade, near as tall as Ned himself, still gleamed with Valyrian patterns. It was a proud heirloom, a testament to Stark history, yet compared to Winter's roar, it felt oddly inert. He recalled again the swirl of runes that had glimmered across the smaller blade's steel, the sense of an almost living presence within. Perhaps he was losing his mind, seduced by illusions of magic. But the memory of those shadow things in the ruins lingered. No mundane blade could have driven them away. Magic or no magic, the intangible threat was real enough in that moment. He prayed he would never see such horrors unleashed upon the north, or anywhere in Westeros. In the quiet of that armory, he found himself speaking in a half-whisper, a small confession to the darkness. I do this for you, Father, he murmured, thinking of Rickard Stark, once so sure, so proud. For you and for Lyanna, and for all who would suffer if this realm falls. He closed his eyes, exhaling. Then he left, feeling the weight of centuries pressing upon him. Morning arrived crisp and clouded, with a cool wind racing across the yard. Maester Luwin, true to his word, summoned Ned, Naerys, Malthus, and Gyanna to the castle's lower vaults. Bran attempted to follow, his curiosity boundless, but Ned gently turned him away. They descended narrow stone steps lit by torches, until they came to a section lined with shelves of scrolls and crumbling tomes. The air smelled of dust and old parchment. Luwin began pulling references from the shelves, consulting them in the torchlight. Some discussed the forging of traditional northern steel, others recounted legends. One scroll, older and more fragile than the rest, included partial translations from runic symbols that might have belonged to the children of the forest. Malthus and Naerys read them with deep concentration, occasionally exchanging puzzled glances. "These runes speak of forging ice with living flame," Naerys said at one point, voice barely above a whisper. "A contradiction in terms. Yet perhaps that contradiction is the essence of the power. Ice and fire, opposing forces woven together." Gyanna, less academically inclined, fiddled with a small flint in her hands, glancing about as though the cramped space set her on edge. "Does it say how they accomplished it? Some incantation or blood ritual?" Maester Luwin frowned. "The text is incomplete, but it suggests that a portion of the smith spirit, his will, was imparted into the steel. A kind of sacrifice, though not necessarily in blood. More akin to forging a bond. One line references a weirwood's presence, the tree's sap possibly used to quench the blade at a critical moment." Ned listened, half fascinated, half skeptical. "If that is so, how do we replicate it? We do not intend to reforge these swords entirely. We only want to restore whatever wards they once held." Naerys traced a finger across a delicate line of runes. "Perhaps we do not reforge them, but we can attempt a binding in the presence of a weirwood, in the godswood. The old gods are said to watch through the carved faces. If they grant their blessing, they may rekindle the wards. We might need an offering, a token of willingness." Malthus spoke softly. "Blood?" "Not necessarily," Naerys said. "It could be a simpler offering of essence, a vow sealed with something personal. Then again, in Valyria, blood was the usual currency of magic." Ned's mouth set in a grim line. "We will not begin sacrificing innocence in my godswood." Naerys raised a reassuring hand. "Nor would we wish it, but you must prepare yourself for the possibility that some exchange is required. If the old gods indeed remain, they may demand more than words." They spent hours sifting through scrolls, gleaning only fragments of knowledge. By midday, they emerged from the vaults, blinking in the filtered daylight. The plan that took shape was simple yet perilous. At midnight, they would gather in the godswood with the relic swords, recite what runic incantations they could piece together from the texts, and hope the presence of the weirwood might fuse the wards with the steel. They would do it in secrecy, for Ned did not wish the entire castle abuzz with rumors of dark rites. Only Maester Luwin, Ser Roderick, Naerys, Malthus, Gyanna, and Ned himself would attend. Possibly Robb as well, though Ned had yet to decide. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ned carried out his usual duties, listening to local disputes, checking the storehouses for winter, ensuring the fortress remained in good order. All the while, the knowledge that he would soon stand in the godswood, attempting a half-remembered ritual of the first men, pressed at him like a lead weight. He could hardly eat at supper, though he forced himself to appear calm for the sake of his family. Arya, always sharp-eyed, noticed his distraction. "Father, is something wrong? You seem quieter than usual." He mustered a small smile. "Only matters of state, Arya. Nothing you need worry about." She looked unconvinced, but said no more. Sansa, for her part, was preoccupied with new dresses and talk of a future visit to the Eyrie. Bran chattered about his archery lessons. Rickon toddled underfoot, too young to understand any of it. Ned found a certain comfort in these small domestic concerns. It reminded him of what he was trying to protect. At last, midnight drew near. Ned donned a plain cloak and made his way through Winterfell's courtyard. The moon hung high, a silver coin framed by wisps of cloud. A hush blanketed the castle. Only a few guards stood at their posts, and Ned's reassuring nod kept them from asking questions. In the distance, a lone owl hooted. He pushed open the gate to the godswood, stepping beneath the arching branches. The heart tree, a massive weirwood with a carved face, loomed at the center near the natural hot spring. Its pale trunk almost glowed under moonlight. Red leaves whispered in the breeze, their shape reminding him of countless watchful eyes. He felt the same sense of ancient presence he had as a boy, when his father taught him to kneel here and speak his prayers. Naerys and the others were already there. Ser Roderick stood off to one side, looking deeply uncomfortable but resolute. Maester Luwin clutched a candle and a scroll with trembling fingers. Malthus and Gyanna wore solemn expressions, each with a hand on the hilt of their respective Valyrian swords. Simon and Tavos had also come, holding torches that flickered in the gloom. The chest containing Ziegler and the golden inlaid sword rested on the grass, while Winter's roar lay sheathed at Ned's belt. Ned paused, uncertain. "Has anything happened yet?" Naerys shook her head. "We were waiting for you. The wards must be renewed with your presence. You embody the ancient bond of the first men." He exhaled slowly, moving to stand before the weirwood. Memories washed over him. Kneeling there as a child, whispering the words of the old gods, feeling the bark under his palm. The air felt charged. The hot spring bubbled quietly to one side, steam curling in pale ribbons. Naerys gave a slight nod to Malthus, who began chanting in softly lilting Valyrian. The words echoed among the trees. Gyanna removed the golden inlaid sword from its wrappings, laying it across a small altar stone. Malthus then set Ziegler beside it. Naerys gently placed a palm on each blade, murmuring a second incantation. Ser Roderick and Maester Luwin exchanged glances, unsettled but abiding by Ned's lead. At Naerys' gesture, Ned placed Winter's roar on the altar stone as well, completing the trio. The swirling patterns on the smaller blade seemed to shimmer under the moonlight. Ned thought back to the ruins, the shrieks of those shadow things, the unearthly weight of that cursed place. Here, in the solemn hush of the North's godswood, the sword almost appeared at peace, though a faint tension thrummed through the air, like a bowstring pulled tight. Naerys turned to Ned, speaking in a low voice that all could hear. "We attempt to combine the essence of the weirwood with these Valyrian relics, to restore the wards. In the old days, forging steel with weirwood sap was said to give the blade a living soul. We cannot forge anew, but we may awaken what slumbers. Will you offer your vow, Lord Stark, as the one who bridges the old and the new?" Ned swallowed hard, then stepped forward. Malthus lifted a small clay bowl, the surface etched with runes. "Place a few drops of your blood into this, my lord," he said softly. "No more than a shallow cut, just enough to bind your essence to the swords." Ned glanced at Ser Roderick and Luwin, who both looked alarmed. Catelyn would surely be horrified at this, if she knew, but he had not come this far to quail. Slowly, he drew a small dirk from his belt, pricked the tip of his left thumb, and let 3 crimson drops fall into the bowl. Malthus nodded, then added a few grains of a sparkling powder that hissed upon contact with the blood. The mixture smoked faintly, exuding a sharp, herbal odor. Naerys accepted the bowl, holding it up before the weirwood as if in supplication. She recited words in Valyrian, then repeated a phrase in the old tongue of the first men, stumbling slightly, as though not entirely fluent. Ned recognized only a piece of it. "Heart of the forest, heart of the blade." She poured the contents of the bowl across the 3 swords. The dark liquid traced over the steel, beating along the edges. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Ned felt a pulse in the air, a soft tremor that seemed to resonate in his chest. The wind in the godswood stilled, leaves going silent. The face of the weirwood seemed to watch them with carved eyes that glistened in the moonlight. A hush fell as the blood soaked into the metal and vanished without a trace. The runic patterns on the swords flickered with a faint glow, so subtle that Ned doubted his own eyes at first. Guyana exhaled sharply. Malthy's tattooed scalp shone with sweat, and Naerys' eyes widened. Even Ser Roderick, stoic as ever, took an involuntary step back. The moment stretched. The swords gleamed under moonlight, shimmering with an uncanny sheen. Then the wind returned in a sudden gust, rustling the leaves overhead, and a sigh seemed to escape the weirwood's carved mouth. Ned's blood was gone, absorbed into the steel. For an instant, he felt as though his heart was beating in sync with an immense, slow rhythm beneath the earth itself. Naerys lowered the bowl, her voice trembling. "It is done." Malthus reached out tentatively to Zeger's hilt, lifting the blade. A bright spark arced along the edge, almost like lightning, then faded. Guyana did the same with the golden sword, eyes shining with awe. No one spoke. Finally, Ned took up Winter's roar. The dagger felt as though it weighed no more than a feather. Yet in his hand, it hummed with latent force. A distant echo of the same intensity he had felt in Valyria coursed through him. Only here it was laced with something calmer, more grounded, like the steady presence of the old gods. Ser Roderick found his voice. What does it mean? Have the wards been awakened?" Naerys passed her free hand across her brow, as if trying to collect herself. "I believe so, but we will not truly know until these blades are tested against the darkness they were meant to fight." Guyana gave a grim chuckle, spinning her sword in a slow flourish. "I would rather not meet more shadows just yet." Maester Luwin hovered, plainly uneasy. "My lord, I fear the cost of what we've done. Even if these swords are imbued with some magic, we have defied the natural order." Ned closed his eyes, sensing the tension in the air. "We have done what we must to protect the realm. May the gods, old and new, have mercy if we guessed wrong." Naerys set her hand on Ned's shoulder, voice gentle. "A worthy vow, Lord Stark. May it light the path ahead." They departed the gods' wood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Ser Roderick escorted Naerys, Malthus, and Guyana back to their chambers with an air of mild trepidation. Maester Luwin hurried off, no doubt to record this event in some secret ledger. Ned lingered beneath the weirwood's boughs, studying the carved face by moonlight. The expression looked the same as ever, solemn, watchful, faintly sorrowful. He wondered if the old gods had truly heard them, or if the entire ritual had been an empty gesture. Yet when he glanced down at Winter's roar, the blade still carried a hint of that faint glow, as though stirring with new life. And in the back of his mind, he felt a pull, as if some corner of his spirit now resided within the steel. It was an unsettling awareness, one he could not quite name. He turned away, letting the hush of the gods would envelop him, feeling both dread and resolve twined as tightly as the swirling patterns on Valyrian steel. The next morning dawned cold and gray, a portent of the winter to come. Ned awoke from restless dreams, images of flaming swords colliding with walls of ice dancing behind his eyelids. He dressed quickly, Winter's roar now a constant weight at his side, then ventured out to see the state of the castle. Word had begun to spread that travelers from the east had arrived, though Jory and the others did their best to keep rumors contained. He found Naerys in one of the courtyard corridors, speaking quietly with Malthus and Guyana. Judging by their serious expressions, they were discussing the next phase of their mission. When she saw Ned, Naerys inclined her head. "Lord Stark, we were just pondering how we might test the swords. Such a test is difficult. We cannot simply conjure the shadows of Valyria." Guyana's lip curled. "Unless those shadows come looking for us." Malthus added, "That possibility is not as remote as it sounds. The wards we broke in Valyria might let the darkness slip through cracks and corners of the world. We have felt it stirring. Our efforts here might draw its attention." Ned's jaw tightened. "Then we must be vigilant. If anything unnatural appears in the north, I will not let it endanger my people." He hesitated, then faced Naerys squarely. "We have the swords, presumably warded. We have tested them as best we can. What comes next? Is there a final step to this alliance you sought?" She pushed a stray lock of silver hair behind her ear. "We originally sought a forging of unity between our lost legacy and the might of the Starks. Some of my compatriots in Essos believe that if the darkness truly comes, it will not be one single front. The ancient prophecies speak of a long night, a time when the sun itself yields to cold and dread. Perhaps that threat arises not only from Valyria, but from the far north as well." Ned's mind flicked to the White Walkers, the ancient others spoken of in hushed myths around the hearth. He had never taken them literally, yet with all he had seen, he could no longer dismiss them out of hand. "You suggest these threats could converge?" Naerys gave a sober nod. "Yes, the heirs of Valyria who remain hidden in the east, certain Targaryen exiles. They may also face trials soon. Winds swirl across the seas, both literally and metaphorically. If the realm stands divided, it will not endure. But if the old powers can unite, wolf and dragon, ice and fire, perhaps it stands a chance." Ned looked away. A memory rose unbidden. The promise he had made to Lyanna on her deathbed. How he had protected her child, Jon Snow, from Robert's wrath. Jon with the blood of a Targaryen prince and a Stark maiden. The union of ice and fire made flesh, though the boy himself was ignorant of it. "That is a hope beyond my ability to shape," Ned murmured. "I am not a king, nor do I wish to be. My duty is to the north." Naerys studied him, a faint sadness in her gaze. "Duty is a noble thing, Lord Stark, but sometimes it must stretch beyond the bounds we set for it. The north alone cannot stand if the entire realm collapses. Nor can the realm stand if the north is lost." She let those words linger. Gyanna shifted, arms folded, clearly uninterested in philosophical musings. Malthus bowed his head slightly. Then Naerys sighed. "For now, let us remain here a time. We must train with these blades, learn their properties. If any sign of this creeping darkness appears, we will be ready. When the time comes, we may have to rally more allies, whether they be Targaryen heirs or others with influence in Westeros. But we shall not act without your counsel, Lord Stark." Ned felt a small measure of relief. "That is all I ask." They parted ways, and Ned spent the day tending to Winterfell's affairs, half expecting disaster to strike at any moment. Yet no monstrous shadows prowled the courtyard, no volcanic quake rattled the halls. Life continued as it always had. The blacksmith hammered, the kitchen stewed turnips and salt pork, the guards drilled in the yard. That evening, as Ned took a solitary walk along the battlements, he spied Malthus below, practicing forms with Zeger. The blade flickered under torchlight, the faint arcs of light along its edge suggesting a power beyond normal steel. Farther on, Gyanna and Simon exchanged quick flurries of strikes, testing the golden sword's balance. They seemed to move more swiftly than ordinary men, as though the swords lent them vitality. Ned's heart clenched, hoping he had not let a dangerous force into Winterfell. But he could not deny a curious spark of admiration. These were men and women thoroughly devoted to a cause. Whatever else they were not cowards. In the following days, a pattern emerged. Naerys and the others trained with their newly warded blades, instructing one another in techniques gleaned from Valyrian archives. Ned joined them occasionally, bringing Ice or Winter's Roar to test their mettle. He found the Winter's Roar, despite its smaller size, seemed to sing in his hand, cutting the air with uncanny ease. Even Ser Roderick, after a short spar, confessed that the dagger was the swiftest steel he had ever encountered. Meanwhile, Maester Luwin took notes, though the perplexed set of his features never quite left him. All of this, Ned tried to keep hidden from the general populace of Winterfell. The Loyalists remained confined mostly to their wing, though they roamed the castle under guard. Rumors inevitably spread, whispers of eastern strangers with odd swords, talk of Ned's secret mission. But the north was vast, its people loyal to House Stark. No outraged lords came pounding on the gates. Yet Ned's sense of foreboding lingered. Each night, he dreamed of the crypts, of old kings stirring from their tombs, ghostly swords in hand. Sometimes he dreamed of a tower of ice, collapsing under waves of black flame. Other times, the smoking sea churned with monstrous shapes. One such dream ended with a vision of Jon Snow, older than he was now, standing upon a battlement of ice, facing a legion of pale-eyed wraiths. Ned always awoke with his heart pounding, uncertain if these were mere phantoms of anxiety or glimpses of some future calamity. Several weeks passed in uneasy peace. The Loyalists began to chafe under the inaction, especially Guyana, who complained that they should be scouring the land for signs of the creeping corruption. Malthus, cooler-headed, suggested patience. If the darkness stirred, it would soon show itself. Naerys immersed herself in studies of the few old manuscripts Luwin could provide, looking for any further clues on binding wards to steal. Ned kept a close eye on them all, uncertain how long this fragile accord would last. Then, as the first snows of the season dusted Winterfell's rooftops, trouble came from an unexpected quarter. One bright morning, a messenger arrived bearing the royal seal. The man, half frozen from travel, was escorted to Ned's solar. There, in the presence of Robb and Maester Luwin, he delivered a scroll bearing King Robert's signature. Ned read it once, his mouth tightening. Robert summoned him to King's Landing again. A new potential threat had arisen, or so the scroll claimed. There were rumors of a Targaryen stirring in Essos, a possible Dothraki alliance forming around a silver-haired girl. Robert wanted Ned's counsel and presence at court, presumably to secure the North's loyalty in the face of this rumor. The words reeked of the king's paranoia about Targaryen exiles. And beyond that, an additional note demanded that Ned bring any oddities or suspicious persons in his domain to the capital for questioning. The order was vague, likely spurred by some rumor that foreigners had landed in the north. Robert's spies must have gleaned the slightest whisper, enough to make him suspicious. That was dangerous indeed. Ned dismissed the messenger, instructing him to rest and wait for a reply. Then he handed the scroll to Robb. "You see the position we're in, son. The king wants us in King's Landing, and possibly suspects we're harboring enemies of the crown." Robb read the parchment, brow furrowing. "We can't simply deliver Naerys and the others to him. You've said they're not Targaryen loyalists in that sense." "They are Valyrian loyalists," Ned corrected. Though Robert will not care about the distinction, he stared out the window, where snowflakes drifted lazily. "We could refuse, but that would invite suspicion, even hostility. The North is strong, yet not strong enough to risk open conflict with the Iron Throne." Robb set the scroll down carefully. "We must be cautious. What do we do?" Ned drew a slow breath. "We cannot bring them to King's Landing. That would be handing them to a dog of the Lannisters. Nor can we keep them hidden here forever." He rubbed his temples. The burden weighed on him like a millstone. "Perhaps we can arrange a plausible reason for them to depart quietly, or hide them beyond the wall, though that is a harsh place." Maester Luwin spoke in a hesitant tone. "My lord, there might be another way. White Harbor is a port. They could slip back across the sea if they wished, or sail north to the Bay of Seals, find some remote corner to lie low." Ned grimaced, recalling the danger of letting them roam free without further oversight. "But it might be the only option. I will speak to Naerys. One thing is certain, I cannot remain idle. If Robert demands my presence, I must go, or risk all-out suspicion. I'll take a retinue. Robb will remain as regent in my stead." He paused, glancing at his son. The boy, no, the young man, stood tall now, shoulders broad from training. "You have grown, Robb. You must watch the North carefully. Do not trust these loyalists blindly, but do not provoke them either. Keep them close. See if they will help defend our lands if anything arises." Robb's eyes flicked with a trace of nerves but also determination. "I will do as you say, father." Ned gave a final nod and turned to the window again. He imagined Robert's face, ruddy with anger, booming about Targaryen threats. If only he knew that the real danger likely dwelled in nightmares older than any Targaryen claim. The memory of Valyria's shadows stood stark in Ned's mind, a chilling reminder that the realm's greatest peril was not the last scions of House Targaryen, but something far darker. That evening, Ned summoned Naerys, Malthys, and Gyanna to a private chamber. Outside, the wind howled, and flurries of snow danced across the courtyard. In the flickering lamplight, Ned explained the contents of Robert's letter. A muscle tightened in Gyanna's jaw, and Malthys' expression darkened. Naerys listened calmly, though her knuckles went white against the folds of her cloak. "So," she said softly, "King Robert has caught a whiff of our presence." Ned nodded. "He demands I come to King's Landing to advise him on Targaryen rumors, and he wants me to bring any suspicious foreigners. If I comply, you will be taken in chains. If I refuse, the entire North might be branded disloyal. Neither choice is acceptable." Malthys' voice was a low growl. "Will not be paraded before that drunken usurper." Ned quelled him with a look. "He is my friend, or was once, and he is still the king. But he will never abide any threat of old Valyria." He paused. "If you remain here, I can hide you for a time, but the king's men may eventually come. If they discover you, blood will be shed. I would spare my people that." Gyanna's hand slid to the hilt of her sword. "Then perhaps we leave." "That might be best," Ned said. "Return across the sea, or find some remote place. The next few weeks will be crucial. If I can pacify Robert, he may lose interest in the rumors. Then, in time, we can resume our alliance." Quietly, Naerys lifted her gaze to his. "And what of the threat? We forged wards into these blades. But if the darkness appears here, who will stand against it? You cannot do so alone." Ned let out a weary breath. "My son Robb will remain behind with a strong garrison. If any sign of unnatural threat arises, I trust you to come if called. Meanwhile, I'll try to ensure that the Iron Throne is not turned against the North. If we fail on that front, all our efforts may be for naught." An uneasy silence followed. They all sensed the precariousness of this plan, but no better option presented itself. At last, Naerys nodded slowly. "Very well. We will depart in a fortnight, no more. We'll slip out of White Harbor or Eastwatch if we must, vanish again into the shadows. But we remain allies, Lord Stark. One day soon, perhaps too soon, the realm will need us both." Ned placed a hand on Winter's roar. "We remain allies, Naerys. When the time comes, you will find the North has not forgotten your warning." Gyanna snorted softly, but her tone was not unkind. "Pray that time doesn't come in a flood of nightmares." Malthys' dark eyes shone with subdued fervor. "We shall prepare, nonetheless." So it was settled. The Valyrian Loyalists would linger only until Ned's departure for King's Landing, then slip away. In the nights that followed, Ned felt the tension of finality thick in the air. He oversaw them training with their swords, providing them limited access to Winterfell's resources. Quietly, they arranged for a small ship at White Harbor, one that could sail discreetly eastward or northward, whichever route proved safer. The day came when Ned assembled a retinue to ride south. Ser Roderick, of course, would come, as would a small guard of loyal Stark men. Maester Luwin remained at Winterfell to advise Robb. Naerys and her companions prepared to depart by a different route, traveling first by horse to White Harbor, then onward by sea. Ned said farewell to them in the early dawn, in a secluded corner of Winterfell's courtyard. Snow drifted over the flags, and the breath of men and horses plumed in the cold. Naerys clasped Ned's hand. "Should the darkness show itself, we will do our utmost to return, or at least send warning. Keep Winter's roar close, Lord Stark. It is part of you now." Ned could feel the resonance of the small blade at his belt. "I will," he said simply. Gyanna, Malthys, and the others gave curt nods, their expressions determined. They rode off through the open gate, carrying with them Zeger and the golden sword, their newly awakened Valyrian relics hidden in wraps. They were gone before the castle fully stirred. Ned stood watching their forms recede into the pale half-light, a cold wind stinging his face. Soon after, Ned gathered his own party. Robb stood by, trying to maintain a poised demeanor, but Ned saw the anxiety in the set of his shoulders. "You are the Stark in Winterfell now," Ned told him quietly. "Guard these walls, keep the peace among our bannermen, and watch for any sign of trouble from the shadows we spoke of. If anything arises, send word by Raven. I will come if I can." Robb drew a breath. "I won't fail you, father." Ned embraced him briefly, then turned to mount his horse. The gates opened again. With Ser Roderick, Jory, and a dozen men-at-arms, he rode forth under the swirling snow, leaving Winterfell behind. The King's Road stretched south, leading to whatever awaited him in King's Landing. Political snares, royal suspicion, and perhaps the chance to protect the realm from its own blindness. As they rode, Ned felt the subtle weight of winter's roar at his side, a reminder of that night in the Godswood, the hush of the Weirwood's presence, the hush of Valyrian incantations echoing in the darkness. Behind him lay the North, behind him the uneasy alliance he had forged with secretive travelers. Ahead lay a realm that did not yet comprehend its peril, a realm that might soon be torn between a reborn Targaryen threat and an older, far more insidious evil. Eddard Stark could only press on, each hoofbeat carrying him deeper into a fate that seemed to loom beyond the horizon. In the swirling eddies of winter wind, he heard an echo of the vow that had bound him to this course, to defend the realm no matter the cost. If the old gods were watching, he prayed they would lend him their strength in the trials yet to come. And if they were not, well, then Ned would face those trials alone, blade in hand, winter in his bones, resolve in his heart. For a Stark must endure, even when dark wings beat in the sky and a cold shadow creeps toward the dawn.